I had been alone for 11 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. I know that sounds like the kind of thing only a crazy person tracks, but when you are the only human being within 40 million kilometers, you start counting things. Days, ration packets, push-ups, the number of times the ventilation system clicks before it finally kicks on in the morning. 17, by the way, always 17. My name is Marcus Hale, former Marine combat engineer, current deep space surveyor, and, at least until my contract ended, the sole occupant of Survey Station Veldris 9. The station was nothing impressive. A prefabricated habitat module bolted to the flat face of a nickel-iron asteroid called VD1109, floating in the outer reaches of the Keth Nebula, like a forgotten lunchbox on the floor of the universe. The mining consortium that hired me paid well, precisely because no one else wanted to go this far out. I had accepted that trade without a second thought. I liked the quiet. At least, that is what I told myself. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that 11 months of genuine silence does something to a person. You start talking to yourself, and then you start answering. You name things. The telemetry console became Gerald. The stuffed cat I had packed as a joke became Sergeant Biscuit, and he sat on the edge of my bunk every morning with the same expression of absolute patience that I found either comforting or deeply unsettling, depending on the day. You start cooking elaborate meals from ration powder and hot water just to have a project. You recite lyrics to songs you half remember, getting the words wrong and not caring. You become, in short, a very strange version of yourself, but a version that functions. That was the goal. The first sign that something was wrong came in month 10. My ration packets were rearranged. This sounds trivial. I understand that, but when you live in a space roughly the size of a 2-bedroom apartment, and you put things in specific places for specific reasons, and those things move without explanation, it registers. The protein packets were in the secondary storage bin. I kept them in the primary. Not a big difference, but a difference. I told myself I had done it in my sleep, or during one of the long work stretches when fatigue blurs your memory of small actions. I ran a quick diagnostic on the station systems. Everything was clean. I moved on. Then the viewport happened. The outer viewport on the port side collected condensation on cold cycles, and I had developed the habit of pressing my hand against it each morning. Not for any practical reason. It just felt grounding. Something solid and real to start the day. My handprint would sit there for a few hours before fading. I knew the exact shape of it. One morning, there was a second mark, lower than mine, narrower, 4 fingers instead of 5. I stood and looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at Sergeant Biscuit, who had nothing useful to offer. Then I ran another diagnostic. Still clean, still nothing. I started sleeping lighter after that. Not out of fear exactly, but out of the particular alertness that comes from being an engineer who has noticed that something in his station does not add up. There was a sound, too, some nights. Not mechanical, not the usual language of pipes and seals and recycled air. Something softer. A low, rhythmic hum from somewhere behind the equipment wall on the starboard side. I told myself it was a loose coupling vibrating at a harmonic frequency. I almost believed it. Almost. I doubled down on routine the way I always had when things felt uncertain. More push-ups, more elaborate cooking experiments. I spent an entire afternoon teaching Sergeant Biscuit the rules of chess, and then played both sides of a game while explaining my reasoning out loud. I was going quietly and thoroughly peculiar, but I was doing it on schedule, and that felt like enough. Then came the night everything changed. I woke up somewhere in the middle of the 3rd sleep cycle to a faint amber glow coming from the direction of the storage bay. Not an alarm color, not an emergency, just a soft, warm light that had no business being there. I lay still for a moment, the way you do when your body wakes up before your brain, and then something in me clicked into focus. I got up. I picked up the wrench from the tool rack beside my bunk, not because I wanted a weapon, but because a wrench is what you pick up when something in your station is not behaving correctly, and my hands needed something familiar to hold. I walked to the storage bay. The glow was coming from behind the far equipment panel, the one covering the cable bundles and insulation that filled the dead space between the inner wall and the outer hull. I pulled the panel away. She was tucked into a hollow space that she had very carefully shaped from the gap between hull layers. a space no larger than a narrow closet. She was tall, even folded as she was, with long limbs and a posture that reminded me of a heron holding very, very still. Her skin was a deep gray blue, and running along her collarbones and up the sides of her neck were patterns, geometric and flowing at once, that glowed faintly amber. Though right now they were dim, almost dark. She was holding a small rectangular device in both hands, 4 fingers on each. It took me a second to recognize what she was holding. It was a copy of my telemetry logs. She had been reading my reports, months of them, from the look of it. Her eyes were enormous, reflective, like a cat's eyes caught in torchlight, and I noticed this before anything else, wet. She had been crying. We stared at each other for what felt like a very long time. I said the only thing that came to my mind. "Do you want some coffee?" Her name was Vel. She told me this slowly, carefully, in standard that was broken, but precise in the way that a person speaks when they have learned a language entirely by listening, rather than speaking. She had been intercepting my telemetry voice logs and the occasional comm transmission I sent back to the consortium for 11 months. She had learned my language from my daily reports, and from listening to me talk to myself and to Sergeant Biscuit through the gap in the wall. I had, without knowing it, been teaching her English. She was Kethsari, a species I knew from xenobiology briefings as one of the older spacefaring civilizations in this region of the nebula. Organized, hierarchical, deeply communal, with a complex social structure built around bloodlines and inherited roles. Beautiful, in an architectural sort of way, the way a bridge is beautiful. Vel told me, over 2 cups of bad instant coffee that she held with both hands and regarded with careful suspicion, that she had been fleeing a faction of her own government. A ruling group that had decided certain bloodlines, hers among them, were to be phased out. The language they used was clean and administrative. She translated it for me word by word, and it meant something that made my stomach drop. She had chosen Veldris 9 specifically because nothing and no one ever came here. She had been aboard before the consortium even assigned me to the station. She had not expected a human. She had planned to wait here, invisible, until she could find a safer route out of Kethsari-controlled space. Then I had arrived, and complicated everything, simply by existing. I asked her what she had made of me after all those months of watching. She considered the question seriously, the amber patterns at her collarbone glowing a little warmer as she thought. "You speak to yourself when you are afraid," she said, "but you call it thinking out loud, so that it does not feel like fear." I opened my mouth, and then closed it again. "You cry sometimes, when the old music plays. Then you adjust your face quickly, as though you can take it back." I looked at the table. "You fix things that are not broken." I did not understand this for a long time. I think now, it is how you rest. I sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the asteroid's slow rotation brought an edge of the nebula into view through the viewport, violet and gold, the way it always looked at this angle, like a painting that was slightly too large for the wall. "Yeah," I said finally, "that's pretty accurate." The days that followed were strange in the best possible way. Vel moved out of the wall. She took the secondary bunk, the one I had been using for storage, and she watched everything I did with the focused attention of someone taking very serious notes. She was fascinated by things I had long stopped finding interesting. She could not understand why I sang badly on purpose for enjoyment, when I was clearly capable of singing less badly if I tried. She spent 20 minutes examining Sergeant Biscuit with an expression that suggested she was genuinely uncertain whether he was alive or performing some kind of advanced camouflage. She was troubled by human emotional range. Her people, she explained, experienced feelings in sequence: grief, then acceptance, then forward motion, clean and ordered. Humans, she observed, seemed to feel everything at once and then make jokes about it, which her people would consider evidence of serious psychological distress. "You laughed when you burned your hand on the heating element," she said, "and then you also winced. And then you said a word I don't have a translation for, and then you laughed again." "That's just Tuesday," I told her. She did not know what Tuesday meant in that context. I tried to explain. It did not help. But she was also, and I say this as someone who spent 11 months alone and developed strong opinions about company, genuinely good company. She was thoughtful. She was honest in the way that people are honest when they have not spent years learning to soften things unnecessarily. When I asked her whether my cooking was good, She told me it was nutritionally adequate and visually confusing, which was the most accurate review anyone had ever given my ration packet meals. She taught me fragments of Kethsari, the word for the color of the nebula at this angle, which had no equivalent in any human language. The word for the particular feeling of being somewhere safe, but not yet safe enough. I taught her card games, the concept of a punchline, and why humans find it funny when something goes wrong in a small and harmless way. She found that last one deeply unreasonable. We agreed to disagree. 3 weeks after I found her, a Kethsari enforcement vessel arrived. I saw it on long-range sensors first. A small, fast retrieval craft, the kind used for what their government called administrative collection. 2 officers aboard. They would have tracked her biosignature eventually. It was only a matter of time, and I had known that since the night she came out of the wall. I had spent those 3 weeks preparing. They hailed the station with the flat, courteous tone of people who expect no resistance. They identified themselves. They identified Vel as a marked individual. They informed me that releasing her to their custody was required under Kethsari interstellar law, and that non-compliance from a non-Kethsari party would be considered interference in a closed governmental matter, subject to immediate station forfeiture. They waited for me to open the docking port. I keyed the comms and spoke in the same flat, courteous tone. I informed them that Survey Station Veldris 9 was a registered independent worksite operating under the Outer Belt Surveyors Compact, a labor and territorial agreement that had been signed, without much fanfare, between the Human Consortium Network and the Kethsari Trade Authority 18 years ago. Most people had forgotten it existed. I had found it in a legal archive at 2 in the morning 6 days after Vel came out of the wall, and I had read every single clause. There was one clause in particular. Any armed intervention against a registered solo survey station required a formal arbitration request to be filed and held for 90 days before any action could be taken against the station or its occupants. All occupants. The clause did not specify species, it specified station registration, and this station was registered, and I had filed the arbitration request 20 minutes ago, the moment I had detected their approach on sensors. The silence on the comm channel was genuinely satisfying. They conferred. I could hear it. Low, rapid Kethsari syllables clipped short, in the way that people speak when they are checking whether someone has actually outmaneuvered them or is simply bluffing. I was not bluffing. The filing confirmation was already in the consortium legal system, time-stamped and logged. You have 89 days, 23 hours, and 40 minutes before you have any legal standing to touch this hull, I told them. I recommend using that time productively. They left. Vel was standing behind me when I turned around. The amber patterns across her collarbone and neck were the brightest I had ever seen them. She looked at me for a long moment. You prepared that, she said. I had some free time. You were going to do that regardless of whether they came today or next month. Engineers fix things, I said. Even things that haven't broken yet. The 89 days became the best stretch of that entire 14-month contract. I filed 4 additional overlapping procedural holds during that window, each one pulling from a different clause of a different agreement, each one adding more time. I had also, quietly, sent a message to the Outer Systems Refugee Coalition, which was an organization run mostly by humans, and 2 species of bird-like beings, who shared what Vel called humanity's unreasonable fondness for difficult situations. They were already working on a longer solution, something more permanent, on the last night before the first arbitration period technically expired, though by then 3 more were already active. Vel stood at the port viewport and looked out at the nebula, the violet and gold of it, the colors that her language had a word for and mine did not. She said quietly that her people believed those who were cut off from their community began to diminish, to become less. It was one of their oldest fears. I stood beside her and looked out at the same light. Funny, I said. I always figured being alone was just practice. For finding out who you are when no one's watching. She was quiet for a moment. I was watching, she said. Yeah, I said. I know. I looked at the nebula, at the violet and gold and the slow turning of everything out there that did not care whether we were small, or afraid, or far from home. You stayed anyway, I said. She did not answer right away. The amber light along her collarbone glowed warm and steady in the dark of the cabin. Outside, the stars held their positions, patient and enormous, the way they always had. Yes, she said finally. I did.